ladies and gentlemen. So we're introducing our first speaker for this evening, Imran Khan. With an industry experience of over 15 years spread across telecom, data centers, and connectivity platforms, Imran Khan is one of the founding members of Rapid and has played a pivotal role in shaping the commercial landscape of the organization and in setting up Rapid's business strategy. Presenting Imran Khan.
So my name is Imran Khan. Do you want the mic? No. My name is Imran Khan. I have nothing to do with politics and cricket. I'm quite bad at it. But I do have a lot to do with education and technology over the last 15 years. I want to be have full disclosure. I'm not an academician. I am not an educationist. But because I deal with the government and a lot of education bodies in terms of curriculum development from the point of view of HR in Pakistan. So last 5 to 6 years, I've been involved with government in trying to address a very big HR challenge in the country. So if you can go to the next slide. Page down. Yeah. So many people who are in the system don't fully understand or recognize the crisis that we face today going into the knowledge economy. And I was recently in Turkey for the last 2 weeks. Then before that, I was in a conclave in Islamabad. And you must have heard, a lot of you must have heard that the government is talking about doing $5 billion, $10 billion exports of knowledge work, IT, consultancy, IoT, different kind of. And one of the biggest concerns we had when we spoke to them was that it is almost impossible to deliver on those promises because nobody's talking about the pipeline of educated students who are going to fill the workspace to take us onto that level playing field. Currently, we have classified it as a knowledge crisis in the country. It is a knowledge crisis. We simply do not have enough people or any people at all for that matter, if you look at the proportion of population versus the skill set that we need to take Pakistan forward into the next 20, 30 years in the knowledge economy. There is a frightening lack of human resource. There's less than 20,000 people who graduate in the tech space, and it is estimated that less than 5% of them are employable. Those are horrible numbers for a country of 220 million people. And one of the key areas that have been identified because we've engaged with the HEC for higher level and a lot of private schools for the primary and secondary level, is that we have been traditionally focusing on the wrong segment of the population or the wrong segment of the schooling system. What we came to realize after several conversations and several meetings of the sort was that the schooling system or the school level exposure is actually key to unlocking potential specifically in a society like ours. And why we say a society like ours is because a lot of people from the sociology profession or people who study social dynamics were also of the view that in a country like Pakistan, there are certain conventional professions that exist that are passed down through generations, almost like hereditary, right? And what happens is that by the time a kid reaches O levels, A levels, or 10th grade, 11th grade, as per the Pakistani schooling system, the household or his mindset is already established towards a certain profession or a certain educational way forward. We've often seen in our own family, kids go to OA levels, they've already sort of decided they want to be a banker because their cousin, father, or sister, someone's a banker, someone's a doctor. And we have a very small bucket of professions that people educate and look up to. And the problem is, there's an even smaller bucket when you go to the college level and the university level. So what happens is you're creating an inverse funnel of people who are educating themselves in professions you don't really need, at least don't really need in the next 20 years. So that is not to say that we do not recognize the role that teachers and schools play in preparing students, because there is obviously a need for social skill development and basic skill set development, such as mathematics, science, literature, the ability to read, write, and to understand and to converse. And that is all key to thrive in whatever we do. But we have traditionally done this, and you can look inwards and think about how we do schooling today. We have traditionally done this at the expense of what we call experiential learning. And experiential learning is first-hand involvement in areas where you see students show even the slightest bit of interest. It is the goal of experiential learning is to create a conversation around areas where students have certain interests. These could be one area, these could be 5 areas, 10 areas of places where students are interested. And then through experiential learning, a student over the years can sort of determine the course he wants to take, sort of have that conversation with his family, especially in Pakistan, with his parents, with his siblings, elder siblings, about what he wants to do in life and how he wants to proceed. Experiential learning is a key way of how Scandinavian school systems operate. Everything over there is less text heavy, more experiential learning, because there's so much to do and so much to learn today that they want to increase the exposure of students to multiple facets. And what we identified in our conversations is that we have been focusing on what is important today. So we sit in a meeting with the government or with private sector, they'll say we need more developers, more coders, and everybody will start talking about developing a curriculum around coding and development. Somebody will say we want to focus on AI, and next week you'll see schools come up with AI. Same with robotics. It was same with sports a couple of years back. People talked about extracurricular. You saw every school came up with basketball team, football team, cricket team. And nobody's focusing on what's relevant tomorrow. And that's exactly what we need to be preparing for, because a lot of these kids, when they get inducted into school, they're looking at their life at least a decade ahead, because they're looking at grade 6 onwards to A level. Then they're looking at, okay, if we get good grades, where do we apply, locally or internationally? And then what do? Do we go abroad? Do we come back? Do we study here? Do we go abroad? And all of these things are at least a decade away from where they are right now. And that's exactly how our curriculum and our focus needs to be fixed. And that's not exactly what we're doing. And what we're doing right now is trying to fill in the gaps today without realizing that the minute you start doing that, you're already filling the gap for people who've passed that stage that that needs to be filled. So this is an actual fact, and this is something, and I actually took this from a lot of the Scandinavian resources that I could get my hands on, and I asked some friends in Sweden and other places to share this with me. And this is from their official educational system presentation, that they've recognized that 85% of the jobs that they're teaching, preparing kids for today, at both the primary and secondary schooling as well as the university level, they simply do not exist today. But that doesn't mean that the demand doesn't exist today. It just means that they are gearing up to get involved in something in that area, and they've recognized that the kids who study today to be employable and to add to the economy tomorrow simply do not have the tools to prepare themselves for things that are about to come. Because if these are not, so put it in Pakistan's context, if these are not doctors' jobs, if these are not engineers' jobs, and these are not banker jobs, then what jobs are they? We don't have the answer to that. Our kids don't have the answer to that. So these could be jobs around buzzwords that you hear today, such as AI, IoT, gaming, other things. They could be things we don't even know about today. So what do we do if we don't know what's coming? So the way that you prepare students in schools for what's coming is not just around, like I said, using tools and devices and technology in your classrooms, but is also to prepare your students for the unknown future. That's why I talked about experiential learning, to make them understand the different areas in the world, the development that's happening, so that it's not just the school's responsibility. A lot of it is taken over by the child's curiosity as well, because he also starts exploring, reading, viewing, understanding what's changing. And the key is to teach our students to be innovative, to be creative, and to be problem solvers. The problem with the current curriculum base or the current way schooling is done, and this is, I'm not singling any school system out, and this is a problem even in the United States and other places, is that the curriculum is structured around literal learning. We call it literal learning. And it kind of reins in the creativity and the freedom of thought and expression, because you need them to follow a certain path, because you need them to clear certain credits, and you need them to graduate based on a certain structure that you have in place. And what that does is it kind of stops freedom of expression and thought, and kind of aligns the student with whatever you are dishing out or whatever you have created. So a lot of schools that claim to foster student creativity and freedom of thought and thinking, they don't actually do that. They would like to think that they do that. But the entire structure that they follow, all the way from the classroom learning, all the way to the textbook they issue, to the examinations that they hold, kind of pushes them down a certain fixed path. It's like a herd mentality. And honestly, as long as the results are good, people are getting jobs, nobody questions it, nobody asks about it. But the way things are changing, people will need to ask about that a couple of years down the line. So how do you educate for the knowledge economy? Now, this is not just a buzzword. The reason we say knowledge economy is because it's an abstract word. Knowledge is abstract. Before, being a doctor, being a civil engineer, being a banker was knowledge. Today, maybe being an artist, being a writer, being a film producer, a game designer, a speaker, a motivational speaker, a trainer, they're all knowledge. And knowledge industry is about 50 times that of a conventional industry, right? Or the conventional learning. How do you prepare your kids for the knowledge economy? The first way is a lot of schools, and I had a long talk with Rukaiya as well about this. It's about experiential learning. It's about exposing students to as many different areas and as many different role models as you possibly can. So one of the questions I asked Rukaiya and a lot of other school people who I met over the last 1 or 2 years was, how many speakers have you invited to your school to talk to students as low as grade 5 or 6 and as high as the graduating class? I didn't get a number higher than 5 or 6. It should be 3 or 4 a month. It was less than 5 or 6 a year. And I asked them, can you tell me how many people besides bankers, somebody prominent like a political figure or a celebrity, how many of those have attended? And the number got even smaller. And what I realized was that the kids aren't exposed to anybody who's a musician, anybody who's a film director, a photographer, a game designer, somebody who runs a successful podcast, streamer, somebody who designs, it does interior designing, does pottery, does paintings, does anything, does comic book illustrations. Nobody from this area was ever made to speak to these kids. And because of that, these schools never knew which one of their students were, let's say, for example, into music. Music beyond what was taught in the classroom, a real passion for music, they didn't know. A lot of these kids were into drawing and artistry and comic books and stuff. Nobody asked them. When time passed, the talent got phased out. Like I said, in Pakistan, they got into conventional jobs and conventional education because experiential learning was almost next to zero. And I'm a big fan of the Scandinavian school system, and I've studied that a lot. And what I see there and I read there is from classes as low as grade 1. So they've broken it up into 3 sets, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, and then 7 to graduation. There are a certain number of non-textual learnings, non-literal learning that are mandatory. They include things such as performing arts or visual arts, music, any philosophy, debates, literature, writing, painting, anything of that sort. And I'll give you a glimpse of that later on. More than 31% of that curriculum is experiential learning. And what that does is create a pipeline or a generation of students every time that has a broad imagination base, that doesn't just learn what's in the textbook, that has a broad imagination base, that has an idea of how different things are done. One of them clicks to him, he latches onto that and starts contributing in his own way to that entire ecosystem. And the advantage of that, to do that in comparison to doing it in the universities that we currently do, because when kids come to universities, that's when we start thinking about them contributing to the workforce, to economy, to society. But when kids do it, or when you do it at a primary level or schooling level, you are taking advantage of a much higher level of curiosity, which results in a much higher level of imagination and a much greater stamina for learning. And that's the problem. If you talk to universities and you talk to them about adding courses to their curriculum, most of them complain that nobody signs up for it. And that's true. I've had to add a lot of courses in a lot of universities, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. Sometimes maybe 1 or 2 courses later, it gets dropped because nobody enrolls with it. And that's because at that age, nobody has the stamina to learn. And the lower and lower you go down the age chain, you'll find the stamina for learning increase more and more. Which is why all academians know there's the best time to learn any language is before the age of 10. The best time to learn mathematics and other things are before the age of 10 and before the age of 9 and all of that. But that's actually true because they have a much greater stamina for learning and they have a much greater imagination. And the third point, most critically for Pakistan, is It is to broaden the mindset behind prevalent occupations in the environment. We have really got to stop churning out more doctors, more engineers, more bankers. I am from an enterprise, one of the largest enterprises in the country. We don't need them. That's not where the thirst is. There are more than 100,000 who graduate every year. They all get jobs. They all get government jobs or private jobs. In fact, many of them are unemployed because there's more than what's needed. But if you tilt the other way towards knowledge workers, people who can teach, for example, there's a thirst of teachers who can teach things beyond primary level education, not just Urdu, Islam, Pashtunis and stuff, but who can really teach something experiential. There's a dearth of teachers. There's a dearth of developers. There's a dearth of people who can write, who can paint. There's a dearth of people who can do stuff like artificial intelligence, robotics, telemedicine, so many different things. So we are completely following something, it's generational. Just like you say, God forbid you say there's generational trauma, it's an intergenerational trauma. You're just passing it down again and again to every generation that comes along and not realizing what you're doing 20 years down the line. So when I asked Ruqayyah to speak at this, because I saw the speakers and I saw the theme and I said, listen, I have a real beef with this. Digital transformation is not just digital tools. Nobody cares today that you have an LMS. I think COVID made sure every school had an LMS and every school had Zoom and different tools. I think that's old history now. I've been to tons of government schools as well who are very successfully implementing Zoom and other Microsoft Teams and stuff that that they've implemented for the students. So I think that's now old stuff. There's no charm in seeing your report card on Gmail anymore. I think that's done and dusted. But real digital or real transformation is actually a paradigm shift to how you're viewing education as a whole, all the way from how you induct students. By the way, our induction system is also quite terrible. We take interviews of kids in nursery, which is quite traumatic for the kid. Most schools do that. Nursery, KG1, KG2, what are they gonna give an interview for? But starting from all the way that we induct kids, that kind of shows our mindset as to how we're trying to evaluate students who get into the system, and all the way till they graduate. And that's what we really need to change. We really need to change how we structure curriculum from the day this kid steps into the school. Yes, that may not be relevant to Cedar because Cedar doesn't do nursery and primary, but a lot of schools do. A lot of large schools take kids in at the age of 1.5 or 2 years old, and kids leave school when they're 15, 16. That's literally, it's almost like parenting, isn't it? Actually, it's more so like parenting because the kid's there till 3 in the afternoon, spends more time at school than he does at home. But that's what we need to do. And that entire model needs to be experiential. We, as a nation and as a society, we tend to undermine the ability of young kids to absorb and to learn. And we do. And I can argue on this like for hours. We talk down to kids. Kids, when they speak in front of adults, are told to shut up or not speak or stay quiet or to absorb whatever's being said. And that's kind of the mentality that the kid grows up with. So he speaks less, he speaks out less, he expresses less. And the least we can do in the schooling system is create a counterbalance or a counterweight to that by giving an environment where they can express their desires, their fears, their ambitions, or things that they very frankly want to do. And that requires someone bold, or people that are bold, an education system that's bold, that's willing to tilt itself on its head and say that we want to change the way kids experience education over the next 12, 13 years, and coming out of it with the same basic education that she requires. But the remaining part of it needs to be so profound and so creative that you can clearly say that my students or the people who study from here come out with something the kids don't have, which is an independent thought process. And very, very honestly, 21st century education needs to start at the primary level, whatever that is for you. For Cedar, it might be whatever it is for them before college. For some schools, it might be as low as KG1, KG2, grade 1, grade 2, whatever. I know of schools in Pakistan that are now teaching AI and coding as low as grade 3, grade 4. And they're having a wonderful time. Kids love it, kids are enjoying it. They take that experience home. They want to do it at home as well. I know a lot of schools who are teaching kids a lot of real life learning through games like Minecraft, and that's doing great. Roblox is huge. A lot of schools have implemented special rooms within Roblox for giving kids experience through gaming and other things. Yeah, sure.
Anyone with the number plate AFJ418? AFJ418. Thank you.
That's true. So this is this brief snapshot. There were too many slides. I just tried to squeeze it into one. So if you look at it, they are catering to all the basic education that you need to give. But if you look at this point onwards, handicrafts. Handicrafts is a big, handicraft goes from everything from woodwork all the way to cement work, by the way. Handicraft, music. And music, not just playing instruments, learning how to compose music, sheet music, so that kids can actually visualize themselves being in an orchestra one day, or doing soundtracks or scores. Visual arts, performing in theater, performing on stage, everything. Technology as a vertical. Religion, geography, home economics. And these are not gender-based education. This is mandatory. All of these are credit courses. 31% is non-textbook learning, which is mandatory to pass. And this starts all the way from grade 1. Are taken in all 3 school stages, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9. Compare that with how your schooling system is structured from grade 1. Maybe it might look a little similar around A levels, yes, but well, not really, because people only give 5 papers and try to pass. But this is compared to how it looks at the primary level. It's just nothing the same. And one of the biggest tools that we identified when we met with the HSC as well for the higher learning, and also with the Prime Minister and his aides, for because we're moving towards a national single window curriculum. And one of the biggest inputs we give was to inculcate design thinking in schools. Design thinking is quite a foreign concept for Pakistan still, which is quite depressing. But design thinking has been around in countries like the UK since the early 80s. So maybe I'll try to give a relatable example. So everybody knows of the company Apple, right? So the man who used to be in Apple, who used to design all the iconic products, was a man called Johnny Ives, who was later knighted by the Queen and became Sir Johnny Ives because of his contribution to the Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences. Johnny Ives was a product of a schooling system that had introduced him to design thinking as early as grade 3. And this is in his book, you can read it. And he won his first competition designing an overhead projector, the ones we used to have before with the transparencies, as early as grade 7, in which he beat out established design firms in the country. And he was awarded the Royal Medal of something at the schooling system. And then he went on to contribute to the education system when he grew older and worked at Apple to kind of create the curriculum. This was back in the 80s. But what we realized is that design thinking as a methodology has great value at primary level and at secondary level. And we need to start inculcating that DNA within the school system. Because it's sort of future-proofing your students. Because design thinking, like I said, is a methodology. It helps you think outside the box. It helps you plan. It helps you adapt. That is the biggest thing that you do. It lets you express yourself. It lets you sort of take on new challenges in a very constructive, in a very structured way. So these are some of the findings that we shared with the PM and some people in Islamabad as well, was that we kind of got some studies done in emerging economies, and we tried to understand what design thinking can actually add value to. And I'm sorry, I don't like text heavy slides, but these are good points, so I put them in. So, but if you summarize all of them, the key learning from design thinking exposure was that students grew more creative. Students became more adaptive to new concepts because they were constantly being taught to analyze situations and new problems in a new way of problem solving. So every time, so what the Scandinavian school system experienced was, once they implemented design thinking, every time over the years when they would do a curriculum change or a curriculum tweak, they would require less and less effort for students to grasp onto it, because the student had developed the ability to kind of decode the new information in whatever way he understood it best and kind of adapt to it. So they found that students were able to identify problems a lot faster when they were put to the test in design thinking workshops. And this is again as low as grade 3, grade 4. Please do read up on it yourself. They found out the students became less hostile to each other, more collaborative, and from the early years were more open to feedback, which is always a big problem for teachers. They try to introduce the concept of feedback loops and criticism. They found out that they were more collaborative with more feedback. They found out that students were far likely to be stressed when failing at attempts of self-expression. These are not failing exams, but when they would try to do something, a project or something creative, and they would fail, they would, rather than being upset or depressed, they would have a better percentage chance of bouncing back with newer creative ideas, because they would have a mindset to draw back on. And obviously what that added was to self-belief as problem solvers. And the last point is the most important, on the basis of which we were pitching design thinking, and I am pitching design thinking to all of you today, is that the focus is both future and solution oriented, because it allows people to grasp onto newer ideas and newer mindsets in ways that help them process that new information. So if any of you have ever done a design thinking workshop, it's a very personal experience. People on the same table go about it in a very different way. Right? And people on different tables go about it in a different way. It gets very competitive. You can see how people are sharing ideas. So it's a very personal experience. It process information very personally as well. So when we say curriculum for the coming decade, I'm sorry, I'm not telling you for textbooks or recommending anything if that's what you were looking for, but I'm advocating for a mindset. So the curriculum for the coming decade, sort of decades actually, for the next 30 years, is advanced tech exposure at school level. That is what that should be focused on. Besides your core curriculum, I'm not advocating replacement of core curriculum. I'm saying what you can add based on your own mix to your curriculum. We need to understand and introduce courses. And here I'm being very specific based on what we're seeing is going to be needed from Pakistan in the next 30 to 40 years. We need to focus on courses around AI, or at least exposure. I won't say courses, these kids might be too young at the primary level, but massive exposure towards the concept of AI. And there are some great resources online, there are some great tools online that really make it fun and understandable for a kid that's in the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. Machine learning, cloud computing. Okay, I'm a little biased because I run a cloud computing company, but still, cloud computing, communication technology, simple communication technology, how to collaborate, collaborative tools, idea sharing tools, 3D animation. I don't know why in a country like ours, there are not more people who are excited about this or teaching this, or it's not in schools today, but 3D animation, illustration. There are so many people on Instagram that love to do digital art, digital comics, digital paintings, and it's a disgrace that they're still on the fringes. They're not even an accepted art form because nobody focuses on this. So digital illustrations, music design. Sorry to say, I know there are foreign listeners to this as well, but I'll use a word which is very common in Urdu. Anyone in our family that does music is called a marasi. That's what we think of people who work around music. So the credibility of music will only come when you start teaching it at a primary level. Publishing. I had a friend who did a Fulbright and came back. She's trying to find a job because she did it in digital publishing, and nobody would hire her because nobody really cared about publishing. And finally, she's convinced one of the local publishers to get into digital publishing. And now they're doing well, but can you imagine one person couldn't find employability as a digital publisher? Space technology. I was in Turkey a couple of days back for 2 weeks, and we saw the most lengthiest presentation, amazing presentation, about how Turkey was planning to make its space technology a household conversation. How they wanted more and more people to get into the technology and the mathematics and the science behind it, because they wanted to have their own successful space launch by 2030 and stop depending on Europe and Russia and others for launching satellites and other things. So they have a national drive to start this exposure at the primary level. So they were talking about exposing primary school students, secondary school students, exchange programs abroad, things like that. And finally, robotics. I don't know how many of you visited NIC. There's practically only one company in Pakistan that does proper robotics, and they do robotic limbs for amputees. I forget the name. You should all go to NIC Karachi and check it out. They're fantastic. But again, out of such a large country, I'm just quoting you one example that does it. And the key part here is, and I tell a lot of schools, because schools are really confused how to create a credit system out of it, especially if you're competing against the national single curriculum, is that these courses could be non-credit. So this is how Sweden does a lot of these advanced courses, not the ones I showed you. It does about 6-7 other advanced courses. They're all mandatory. You can't get your transcript, you can't get your degree until you pass them, but they're non-credit courses. So if you fail them, it doesn't affect your GPA, your scoring, A grade, B grade, C grade. But if you don't clear them, they keep getting stacked on and you don't really get anything until you clear those courses. So, and I can clearly tell that that is their segue into eventually making those. They're just trying to make people comfortable with the concept. So this is one of the things I recommend you to, for example, see. These could be non-credit courses, but just get kids involved in the curriculum. Just get kids involved in the exposure part of it, and then you can look at it later on. One of the big things that we miss in Pakistan is in school and out of school experiential learning. There's very little experiential learning in Pakistan. There's close to none if you look at the percentages. Primary or secondary school kids hardly take school trips outside the museum, the zoo, and the god-awful maritime museum. It's Faisal. And I've never heard of school kids go to Soparco to look at, the space lab or something like that. I've heard of school kids go to a company like mine who does cloud computing. I've never seen a kid go to a gaming studio. A lot of my friends here are from gaming. I've never heard anyone do this. Yep. That is one. Exactly. Exactly. But that's just one. And I'm talking about us. I'm talking about the whole country, right? No, there's no visits at all. So, so there is practically no experiential learning. And unfortunately, even internships in universities today has become a means to just get your degree. But the concept of an internship was to get someone into the ecosystem of a profession that they like, so that they can kind of gauge if that's what they want to do for the next 20 years of their life. So experiential learning is key. Kids absorb at an amazing pace. And kids need to be taken to organizations, institutions, laboratories, facilities, in city, outside city. Things are a lot better now. Things are a lot safer now. We can clearly do all of this. And if you can't at least start inviting and paying for people to take flights and come to your school, spend a day, talk to kids, you'll be surprised how many kids, when you talk to, you find out they have latent desires to be an astronaut. They have latent desires to be a game developer, a musician, a wrestler, or God knows what else they want to be, but nobody's talked to them about it. So it just gets suppressed to a point that we churn out more bankers, doctors, engineers in the next 10 years. So, like I said, regular rotation of key people from various fields to attend and give exposure to kids of real life examples. You'll be surprised how many people are willing to do this and how little schools are willing to invite them. So if the school tells me that look, people don't come, I'll call them liars to their face. It's not like that. I represent a large group of IT professionals from Pakistan who have tried for many years to get into, not colleges, to get into schools and speak to students. And schools always say they'll call us back, but they never do, because we're not exciting enough, we're not glamorous enough, we don't fit into the curriculum. So why would a school dedicate an auditorium for 3 hours to someone who has nothing to do with their curriculum? It's a waste of time for them. So in school and out of school experiential learning is key. Regular rotation of key people, like historical sites, students organizing tech facilities. Tech facilities should be mandatory. In the next 20 years, it's all going to be about tech and knowledge work. You have to have at least one experience for students, something tech related, could be anything. Could be a robotics lab, an AI lab, a large software house, a cloud computing company, a game studio, anything at all. It all adds to the experience. And one thing that all the countries that are doing well have understood that there is no replacement for experience. You can throw as many textbooks as you want, or you'll have a bunch of rebellious students who are going to get tired of reading technology. But there is absolutely no experience, no replacement to experiential learning. And there is no experience like experiential learning. The ability to touch something, the TDF Magnificence. Why is it such a success? Students are able to touch things that they have read about, or touch concepts that they have read about. And this is very important. So just to summarize, there are 4 key steps which I feel all schools should take or educational institutions should take, regardless of what stage of education they focus on. A revamped 21st century curriculum, truly revamped 21st century curriculum. By that, I don't mean if you're teaching coding in your school, you replace the old coding language with the new coding language. I mean teaching truly new generation technology or new generation concepts at least. Experiential learning as a part of curriculum. Students need to have completed certain exposure credits in order to progress further. Design thinking as a DNA in schools, please. I know all of you have read about it, but if you haven't, do read up or get in touch with Habib University. They have an amazing design school designed by Stanford. It's led by a brilliant guy called Anzar Khalik. Brilliant. Do reach out to them. Take their assistance. They will definitely help you in your school set up something. And like I said, implementation, obviously, of tools and systems that make it easy. Textbooks are expensive. Don't make them buy more textbooks. You lose students all the way. There are tons of free resources. There are tons of people who dedicated their life to creating free resources, video content, audio content, textbooks, literature. Try to make it as digitally easy to pick up as possible, because that is another pitfall of education. Books are expensive. Education is expensive. To try to make it as easy as possible. So I'll end with that, and I would love to take any questions if you have any. Please. Sure. Can you introduce yourself? Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, so my first question is that we provide shadow work, and not talking about internship. Not about shadow work. Students ask for grade 8 to get an exposure of how this works, especially in science.
As low as grade?
Grade 8, so that they can decide which subjects to opt for, and there are different fields other than one fresh rise by the parents.
So yes, I have been trying to get schools to get students as low as grade 7 to do apprenticeships under different departments. So technology, development, software, design, UI. Nobody's really taken it on. But yes, as principal, we do want to.
Kids can approach to you.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to grade 8, like opting for subjects, computer science, especially for girls, because there's gender-based subjects as well. So I don't see a lot of girls opting for computer science. I think a lot of computer science. But there will be, 2 girls in a class of 10 boys. So it's difficult to educate them because there is no exposure the girls can have. So if you come to like you, provide them shadow work, they can actually see for themselves with hands-on experience.
I'm open to that, and I would like to draw on what you said. We don't regard any education as gender-based anymore. So that's one thing that we look at, especially in organization. Secondly, for the girls in your class, I would like to openly tell you that 31% of my technical workforce is females. My information security team that looks at global information security is all females. So if you have any female students who are role models or people to talk to in the tech space, I'm more than welcome to set them up with anyone.
Okay, so how can you change the parents' mindset and this pressure from them on the target to better professional degree and what they want? So I understand that you can change the shift from schools, but literally parents on this,
Okay, so this is a good question. I read up a bit on this, and so this is a mixture of effort between the student and the school. But the student, you understand there's a power dynamic at home. So you can be the best of parents to your child, but there is an inherent power structure which will stop the student or the child from speaking out in front of the parents, merely out of pure respect. So there's a weight that schools carry. And you've seen probably this in documentaries and movies about the West and the education system, where you see schools and career counselors and other teachers step up to convince parents when a child wants to be on the school band or the school dance troupe or something. It's very similar to that. So the problem with exposure is that the parents today also suffer from lack of exposure on these areas because they're caught in the hustles and they don't know what all these things are. When they don't know what all these things are, they don't read up on them or they scroll by if they see them on the news, on the website. So they don't know their economic applicability, how important it is, how interesting it is, how popular it is. So when schools do adopt these new curriculums or new platforms, it is their job. See, I'm sorry, but parent orientation is usually only done when they join school or when the new term starts and there's a change in the facility or the campus. But every time you introduce a new concept, it is very important to have parents on board to make them understand why you did it. And I hope you have good reasons behind doing it, right? So why you did it, why it's important, what are the signs that you read that you had to put this in the curriculum? How can my child benefit? What are the roadmaps for that child going forward? These are very important conversations that you need to have. And once you have that, because let's understand, you have infinitely more credibility than the kid in the eyes of the parent. And then when on a daily basis, that interest and that conversation is being reinforced by the kid when he goes home, that's when the real tipping point comes. So unfortunately, the onus is on you to make the parent aware because we are in the middle of generations where we still have parents from the older generation, but we are quite advanced ourselves. But hopefully this will get better in the next generation and maybe even better in the next one because technology will have been a part of lives at that point. So for this generation, the onus is on teachers in the school system, and that's how it's being done all over the world.
Ever since schools reopened, we have seen the parents who are like saying that now you should just shut down the laptop completely, get out the books. There are the set of parents who have taken really to speak that and all. We need to create the parents as well. We have seen that in these article section, parents were accepting the fact that the students have to come on, they have to start when they have to cover a PPTs and point out. But once the whole COVID situation is stopped, parents are back to, they are asking the schools to know the copy work. Where is the copy work? Where is, they want worksheets, they want again worksheets first. Now they are not depending on Google Classroom. They are depending on Acme Tab. These are everyday queries we are dealing with. I think that's also that the parents from the very beginning, like you mentioned, that kids at a young age, kids are curious, they're born curious, and then it's us who the enhance their curiosity. I have felt that being obviously a parent and an education is that, starting on at a very early age, not even primary, but as early as 3 years old or 2 years old, just even with a little bit of learning basic manners through experience will go a long way. And I think that's where we're getting to basic, and that's the biggest challenge with parents also. A lot of parents, as young as with children that are 2 years old to middle school and primary years, they're going through the same challenge, to give that experience because again, generation gap, there are parents that are really old at home and then their parents are, old as in old school thinking, and then there are some of us who may be now more, aware. And then some still in that process. So I think the parent challenge is gonna be there for a while.
Yeah, like I mentioned, it's an intergenerational challenge. But at the same time, so there are ways to make it easier. So to answer your query specifically, and you were saying, why do parents ask for worksheets? Why do parents want the laptops to be closed? Because they're used to they have memories of a tangible assessment of success or failure. They're used to holding a report card, एक laminated report card आती थी. Report card, they used to seeing a grade, they used to seeing a certain way through which they can monitor and create a feedback loop. Now you've kind of turned it on its head. It comes on a portal, it comes on your email. The metrics for grading are different. In our time, there was not much qualitative analysis of the student skill set. But if you read the report cards today, it's 5 pages long and there's actual qualitative assessment of your child's progress in school. Those are things parents are not familiar with. So when you tell them to do that digitally, well, coming from a tech firm, let me tell you, parents are terrible at technology. There are people in my organization that still today call the IT guy to set up email. It's quite depressing. It's a technology firm. But that is how they are because they tend to purge information that they don't need and only retain what they do. So they never really got comfortable. They went, let me be very clear, they went on Zoom because they were paying you school fees. Very honestly. So they wanted to milk their money in whatever way you wanted them to. You could have done a radio broadcast. Look, other people would have done it because they're paying you fees. But if it was free, trust me, nobody will log on to Zoom because parents find it difficult. Which is why a lot of schools, when they introduced the LMS, when they introduced the parent portal, they took great pains in teaching parents how to use it. They took, to educate them. But it will still be difficult because it's not second nature to a lot of parents. A lot of us are young parents, but the average Pakistani male, let's say, if I talk about the male as authority figure for education, his kids go to primary school, he's already crossed 40. There are very few young parents today in terms of total population. You might see a lot of young parents around you, but if you take the total diaspora, there are very few young parents. I have kids I see at school who are hardly, in the 5th grade or 6th grade, and their parents are 50 plus. That's your average age, 45 to 55. So getting them to understand technology is quite cumbersome. We get challenged ourselves. So imagine kind of like multiply that by 2 decades and see where that ends up. So that is a challenge, but there's no easy way around it. It is only familiarity that makes it easy for them and the value that they see. I think the only way is to just tell them no. If they want you to shut down their laptops, shut down digital report card, just say no, this is the way we do things today. We save paper, we don't want to do these things, we want information. I remember parents were uncomfortable with students their kids getting access to the report cards. Because that's what happens. The kid has an email ID, he gets a copy of the report card to read, and the parents get it. And the parents were extremely uncomfortable that why do kids get the report card? We don't want them to know because they want to manufacture a narrative when they go home that your teacher said this and no more gaming, no more YouTube, no whatever. But when the kid reads it, he's like, I know exactly what my teacher is telling me. So this was a big debate in a lot of schools. I remember CAS, Frobels, Hux. This was a big debate. Don't give kids access to report cards. And they said, no, we will give kids access to report card because he or she has to face the teacher the next day and they need to understand. They have to write, right? So unfortunately, it's just beating with a hammer again and again. And eventually you break down barriers and you make people understand more, which is why the focus on experiential learning more, so that there are less literal parts to focus on. I mean, fine, he did well in math or literature and grammar, and these things are important because they're tools to learn. But in other areas, experiential learning is measured so differently. There are no grades. There are no successes or failures. There is knowledge. And it stops at that. This is an imparting of knowledge. And that's where it is. That it begins and ends at that. And that is a big shift. I don't know if anybody's speaking here today. I think someone was speaking parallel about how grading or evaluating yourself is evaluating better. Yeah, so that's how things are changing. And I'm pretty sure in the next decade, we'll see the grading system turn on its head completely, where it'll all be about knowledge and what people have taken away from it.
They've already gone to standards. Like they don't have letter grades, they have standards.
Exactly.
The child will read exceptionally well, but they're not marks.
This is so deeply rooted, by the way. This has made its way onto the corporate circle as well. So you must have heard it was a big deal when Google stopped having the bachelor's degree as a requirement for a job. Big news. It was on Yahoo, CNBC, everywhere. Like, okay, And so we did that like last year. So our company, Rapid, frankly, because we couldn't find any graduate people in technology, so we had to go to non-graduates who were like certificate holders. So when we finished the graduate requirement, everybody from my board of directors, everybody to my HR head was like, what, the non-graduates? As if I'm saying they're like illiterate or like homeless people. I'm like, no, I don't need their degrees. I don't really care about how they did in sociology, and I don't need all of that. I need them to be good at the skill set and the knowledge set that I want. And I've had a wonderful time. I've had technology people who are non-graduates. I've had technology people who are not even A-level or interpass. I have hired people in finance who are not graduate, but they're amazing with numbers and financial analysis. And they've done like financial analysis for companies like Food Panda, Careem, and other places. And so what does that tell you? Haven't we been measuring wrong? What the measure of success and talent is? Because these guys don't possess anything. They haven't been through the structure that we have. Or I mean, you spent like what, 6 years in Lahore, 5 years in Lahore, trying to get a degree. So, but see how that's been like turned on its head. And I'm not undermining the importance of the degree. I'm undermining the unnecessary importance that is laid on education that is irrelevant. That degree can have 15 courses that are experiential too, right? And that degree will just mean a lot more. Because if someone without a degree is able to provide and fulfill that need, that means something's wrong somewhere. And nothing's wrong with that person because he's doing great. So something is wrong with the education system. So that's what we need to change, very honestly, from primary school onwards. And like I've spoken to Rukaiya several times, the US school system is like the first example in the world to look at because there's very little focus on experiential learning and a lot of it is done on a community level. But if you look at the Scandinavian school system, yes, granted, they're a smaller population, easy to pull off, but some ideas there are fantastic and very simple, very cost effective, and very, very child friendly. You know, and then can be considered. So I think that's something we should all look at. But design thinking, I think, is something that should be a mandatory thing. And like I said, if
Have it as a board, or I grade 7.
yeah, but I don't know if you hear what I'm talking, but design thinking needs to be a complete DNA of the organization. That's what Habib University is trying to do. They started with experiment, now they're trying to do it completely. And you know, I think they're great people to reach out to. They love to do it. I think Modi Dawood's initiative had do design thinking at Stanford. So that's an amazing thing you guys can look at as well. And then people like us are always available for, like I said, experiential learning for your students and things like that. Anybody else? Yeah, sure.
My question is that what should we do about this parent issue? Because most of the parents are not educated in this tech. And what happened most of the time is students trick their parents by doing a lot of other stuff on their technology devices or these stuff. So when the parents might just take their notes, then when they take the notes their child, so they might be upset. Okay, what our child is doing right now, and they will blame all the technology stuff. Okay, this is wrong, this is not good thing, and you should be working on this stuff or this stuff, you should be studying right now. So होता यही ज़्यादा कि बच्चों को उस टेक्नोलॉजी स्टफ से हटा दिया जाता है क्योंकि बहुत सारे एजुकेटेड नहीं होते इस टेक्नोलॉजी में, तो तब क्या किया जाए?
देखिए, I'll address the second part of your question because that's the core of the problem is when the parents think that exposure to tools will allow them to YouTube, Netflix, play Minecraft, play Fortnite, whatever. The biggest fallacy of control is that absolute control will result in absolute focus or absolute success. It doesn't happen that way. You can curtail one behavior extremely and it will erupt in another manner. Today's technology, a lot of us who are older would remember that back in the day, it wasn't computers, it was cricket. Parents were extremely upset because kids would be down from 3 in the afternoon till 9 in the night playing cricket. And the first thing the parent would hide would be the cricket bat or the ball if the son or daughter was bowler. At that time it was cricket. The biggest punishment was taking the bat ball away or the kit away and saying you can't go down. A little before that was cycling. Cycling was a big thing in Pakistan back then in the day as well. People would take away the cycle or put a chain on the cycle or take the chain away from the cycle and parents would say, do your homework, study, no cycling. There's always been something that pisses parents off in every generation, by the way. So therefore, it's the fallacy of control, where you think that you can control behavior by removing something from the ecosystem. It doesn't work. Behavior can only be controlled with kids and parents through active communication and understanding of the consequences. It's not just fancy words. If you have nieces, nephews, kids, try it out with them. You can argue as much as you want, they will not listen. But after having a conversation with them 50 times, the 51st time, you will have a greater success rate than you had before. So yes, a laptop can be used for YouTube. As long as you have the explicit filter on, that's no problem. Let them watch it. I mean, all he's going to watch is cartoons, streaming videos and stuff like that, right? Watch some game streamer stream Fortnite or Valorant or something. What does it matter? Just because the parent identifies with Hum TV and Airwise dramas, why do they feel that a kid watching a game stream online is alien? It's his method of entertainment. And why are you watching that horrible content on TV, right? So he's watching something else. The problem is conformity, which is what I talked about, that by the metric, he's already decided what he wants to be because his parents make him conform. The problem is conformity. And that's where it erupts, and that's where the kid reacts, because he can't process why one set of individuals are doing practically the same thing in the same environment, but we're not being allowed to do that. So there is no short answer for this. Yes, the kid will watch YouTube when he has free time on his hand. Let him play Fortnite and Valorant. But does it really matter? First of all, I don't understand why YouTube and gaming is such a bad thing. And it's been like that since I was a kid. Like everybody hated, why would you play Nintendo and Sega? What does it matter? It doesn't make any difference. I sucked at cricket, so I would play Nintendo all day. What does it matter? Did it really change me as a person? Do I function differently? Do I talk differently? Do I not process the world the same way? These are all remnants, like I was saying, this is generational trauma. This is just intergeneration issues. And they will get weeded out. It's a waiting game in a year or two. So I think the conversation should be to let kids do what they want as long as they can deliver what they have to. This fixation on conformity is more damaging than it is good, by the way. Sure. Thank you. You can trade.